Unknown to the enemy, the Soviet command was concentrating reserves and equipment ready for action. Work continued day and night on the Volga crossings. This was a front line in every respect, and thousands of people displayed courage and endurance under constant enemy fire. Men, machines, and ammunition were sent across to the right bank on boats and ferries. Military commanders and old-time Volga navigators took their places side by side on the captain's bridge. Step by step, with the utmost persistence, sudden death was prepared for the enemy. And the enemy was kept under constant observation. Officers reconnoitered enemy positions from advance observation posts. Then, one day, the three fronts went into coordinated action. The Stalingrad front under the command of General Yeremenko, Military Council member Khrushchev. The Southwest Front commanded by General Vatutin. The Don Front under the command of General Rokossovsky. A crushing mass artillery blow was launched on the 19th of November. The day the Soviet forces began their offensive was the beginning of the end for the fascist hordes that had marched to the Volga. An avalanche of fire and metal was poured on the enemy from thousands of guns. Like fiery dragons, the rockets of the famous Katyusha mowed the enemy down. Enemy positions were heavily bombed by flyers in the Air Force armies commanded by Generals Kryukin, Rudenko, and Krasovsky. When the German forces had been stunned and deafened by the Soviet artillery and Air Force, the big attack began. Wide breaches were made in the enemy defenses. Through these, Soviet tanks pushed ahead with the purpose of linking up with the troops of adjacent fronts. Soviet cavalry forces raced through the breach toward the German rear. After breaking through the enemy defenses, the troops of the Southwestern Front pushed ahead in a vigorous drive to the southeast, bound for the Don River crossing. A day later, on November 20th, the forces of the Stalingrad front also struck heavy blows at the enemy. And on the fifth day of the victorious offensive, advance units of the Southwestern and Stalingrad fronts met in the snow-covered steppes near the village of Savetsky. On November 23rd, exactly according to plan, the steel ring around the German fascist grouping between the Volga and the Don was closed. By December, the Nazi forces, surrounded on an area 30 by 40 kilometers, were separated from the remainder of their troops by 100 to 150 kilometers. To relieve their encircled grouping, the Germans now formed a new group of the Don Army under the command of Field Marshal Manstein. It advanced from the Kotelnikovo area in order to join the encircled forces. The enemy onslaught was repulsed by the 51st Army under General Trufanov and General Malinovsky's 2nd Guards Army. The Soviet forces pressed ahead on the Donbass and Rostov sectors, threatening the enemy's entire southern grouping and forcing the Germans to make a hasty retreat from the North Caucasus. The fate of the enemy's surrounded troops was now decided. The Nazi command tried to use transport planes to supply their forces with food and ammunition. But it was useless. This scheme was frustrated by hurricane fire from the Soviet anti-aircraft guns and attacks by fighter planes. But the encircled enemy continued to resist. Troops of the 62nd Soviet Army were engaged in constant fighting amidst the ruins of Stalingrad. Stubbornly and without let-up, they smoked the enemy out of every trench and every cellar. The fighting initiative was now in the hands of the Russians. The end was drawing near. The plan was to slice up the enemy's besieged group by blows from different directions and mop up unit by unit. The Soviet command, through the headquarters of Artillery Chiefs Marshal Voronov and General Rokossovsky, in a humane move, on January 8, 1943, sent envoys to the enemy troops with an ultimatum to surrender. When the time limit was up, the order was given to advance. Enemy positions were bombed steadily. On a bitterly cold January day, after the artillery had pounded the enemy lines, the infantry went into action. The trapped Nazi forces suffered enormous losses. The land along the Volga was strewn with smashed enemy equipment. In this final battle, the men in all arms of the service showed true valor and heroism. The enemy could no longer stand up to the pressure. Those who had come to the Volga as conquerors now began to crawl out of their shelters, emerging from cellars and dugouts. In the meanwhile, units of the Don Front, after smashing the enemy's last defenses, had linked up with the city's defenders.